Nice to meet you all. He forgot to say that I am the best karaoke singer in the world. This is my private title. But going to the point, so what I'm going to speak today is Angular Universal, how to make your application more search engine optimized, better optimized for content delivery network, and also user-friendly. As it was said, my name is Maciej Treder. This is my handle. You can find me on all of those networks under the same nickname. So Twitter is the thing which I am most active. A little bit about myself. I am from Krakow in southern Poland. On my daily basis, I'm working in Akamai Technologies. This is a content delivery network company based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. With Angular, I'm working after hours. I'm more Angular passionate. I'm also contributing in open source and from time to time writing some articles and publications about JavaScript and so on. The outline for today's agenda, I would like to say what is the biggest pitfall of single-page applications, and then we are going to smoothly, step-by-step, speak about how to solve it, what other pitfalls can we meet if you are going to introduce server-side rendering, how to deal with API performance, what more can you do with Angular Universal, and as a final word, I would like to mention a little bit about alternative to Universal, to be also SEO friendly, but not use server-side rendering, and summarize that all what we said together. So, first thing first, whenever you are building your application, and you are working with Angular, you are working with CLI, you are using a lot of ngserve command. It's pretty nice things, giving you a just-in-time compiler. You are able to see your changes in the code immediately. And finally, when you are coming to the end of the process, you are starting to use the AOT compiler to see if everything is working nice when you are getting out of compiler in the code bundle. If you say that, okay, I'm ready for production, I can deploy, often people think that adding just --prod parameter is just all what you should to do, because you got this ahead of time compiler. A part of that, your code is minified, tree-shaped, so it's performing quite well. It's loading super fast. Here you can see the comparison between just ng-build and ng-build with prod parameter. So this is the moment when a lot of people just finish the process of developing application. But people are forgetting about the common SPA problem, which resides, in fact, in this small file for the Apache config or any other configuration file of your server. So what people often do, they route every request which comes to your server to just one point to your index.html. What's the problem with that is whenever some user comes to your application, he gets the HTML and JavaScript. That's great. The build is made on the browser end. Everything is rendered and displayed beautifully. But when another user comes and requests for completely different route, he gets exactly same HTML and JavaScript shipped to the browser. And all the Angular magic and any single-page application magic is done on the browser side. The problem with this is that this HTML is a quite, I would say, not rich one. It's just a skeleton with an uproot and tons of JavaScript attached to it. So how could we, and also what needs to be mentioned here, this is how most of search engine robots sees your website. This is also how any prefetching system sees your website. So if you are sharing links on Facebook or sending an iMessage with your iPhone, your user won't get this nice prefetch overview of what is inside the website. So what we can do with that is a server-side rendering. This is one approach of solving this problem. So now, whenever our first user comes, he gets the HTML and JavaScript again. The difference is that this time the HTML is shipped much richer, and whenever another user is coming, he gets, thanks to what we are doing, we are moving the Angular logic to the server, and thanks to the Node.js, we are able to ship completely different, the dedicated for this page version of HTML and JavaScript. This is the example of the website which you got using the ng-init command. This is this basic scratch with server-side rendering attached. As you can see, the HTML is much richer. This messy content here is mostly the Angular logo in base 64 encoded. But under that, you can see that we have rendered here some links to rough heroes, targets, CLA documentation, etc., etc., etc. This is how it looks with the prefetching systems. So Facebook is able to fetch the data, to display title, to display the content of the page, maybe some image if it is there. Same with Google and any other search engines. Regarding performance of loading data and so on, Angular compared to prod flag, it's quite similar. In fact, in my opinion, those stats are just equal. So, going with all of that in different way, what we just doing by introducing Angular is that this is comparing the traditional way, the ng-build prod, when on the left side, we have the request coming to the server. Browser is loading HTML. This is the moment when probably you are displaying some kind of loader. Then application is bootstrapping in the browser, and we got the first meaningful paint. With server-side rendering, because we are shipping this HTML much quicker. Of course, this orange box is a little bit wider because we need time to render the thing on the server side. But in result, we ship the first meaningful paint to the user much quicker. And when this is shipped, when browser renders the HTML, then JavaScript comes to the action. Angular is bootstrapped in the traditional way, and the views are overlapped. So the view which is interactive for the user comes as well at the end, in fact. Okay, so how to start? There are two ways which I propose you, the official guide and the ng Toolkit way. The ng Toolkit is a project which is founded by myself, and recently official guide, the Angular team have shipped the CLI plugin, which is in Angular word called schematics, which gives you an ability to really easily apply universal to your project. I found the ng Toolkit something one and a half year ago, when we were lack of this schematics. So at this moment, they are working quite similar with one slight difference, which I'm going to tell about. So this is how you work with the official way. You just use the ng-add command from the CLI, and thanks to that, you receive all of those files created on your end, which we are going to cover. What's going here under the hood really soon. One thing which I think must be mentioned here is whenever you are using the official way, the official guide from the Angular team, they are creating for you the app server module, which will be the new entry for your application for Node.js, and they are creating and they are just making slightly changes to the app module, which is the entry point for the browser. What I strongly recommend to you is to make a small change here and add one more additional module. All of that because it makes your code much cleaner if you will keep imports which are specific for browser and specific for server in two different files. So you are just not overwriting some imports in the app server, but you keep different ones for different environments. Okay, so this is about official guide. About ng Toolkit, what is that slightly difference? The first one is that ng Toolkit gives you this additional app browser module out of the box. And also, it ships with... we don't have it on... No, we have it on the screen. It ships with some nice services used for working with window object and document and so on. We are going to cover that soon. After you install these schematics, you are just typing 2 commands, running the build. When build is done, you are running the server, and it is instigating for you the Node.js, and your application is running on localhost. You can do with it whatever you want. You can pack it into Docker. You can push it to the EC2 container, depending on your environment. Under the hood, both of those schematics, as well official guide as ng Toolkit, they are creating for you the server.ts file, which is the file for Node.js. It will be compiled to server.js. And what we are doing here is we are setting up the Express application. We are configuring the HTML engine with the ng Express. This module is shipped from the ng Universal team. And we are providing just 2 parameters. The first one is the entry point of the application, so our app module, app server module. This one is built out of the app.server.module.ts file, and we are providing information about the additional providers which we need on the server side. So in every case, that one additional provider is, for example, it's a map of your lazy loaded modules, because server-side rendering is not working really smoothly with lazy loaded modules. We need to say Express and Node.js explicitly what our lazy modules are. The other thing which we have in the server.ts is routing for our requests. You could compare that to that Apache configuration which I show you on the first slide. We are just saying that every request which ships to our Node.js should be dealt with by the Express engine with the engine which we provided just in the previous slide. And finally, we are saying that we want to serve every static file from our browser build. So any JPG, CSS styles, JavaScript, and so on, and so on, and so on. Okay, so we covered this part, how this is working, how can we achieve that. So we can now move a little bit to this moment when I advised you to use 2 different entry points for server and browser. So why do we need it, and how could we work with that? The first problem between browser and server, and this is the major problem, is that on the browser side, we have some object which we are lacking on the server side, and vice versa. So on the browser, we have document, window navigator, and all of those browser APIs like accessing gyroscope and any other fancy stuff, which of course we are lacking on the server. And on the server, we can manipulate the file system, or we can get the request from the user, manipulate with the response, which we don't have on the browser, of course. So if you will write in your application this simple code, which is logging out what is the language said in the browser, on the server side, it will cause the issue that this object is not defined, that Node.js is not able to access it, which will cause that server-side rendering will break on your end. The solution for that is super simple, because the Angular team shipped the isServer and isBrowser helper functions. To work with them, you need to inject the platform ID from the Angular core package, and then you can use the if statement to determine on what kind of environment you are working currently. So I am executed in the browser or in the server part. The another approach, which is using These helpers, in fact, is to write a wrapper services for objects like documents, windows, and so on. And this is what I'm trying to do with NG Toolkit. This is that additional thing which you got with it. So, for example, for window object, this code which we're breaking the server-side rendering with NG Toolkit is using the request object. We are creating the service which is using the request object, and depending on where we are, if we are on the server, we could display, let me put it this way. First, we are using the request object, and let's take a look what we got in this request object. So if we are on the server side, we are going to execute this console log, which will give us the information which we were looking for previously. So the language set by our user. And the wrapper service implementation comes here. So we are injecting the platform ID, we are injecting the request, we are using the optional annotation here because this injection token is not available in the browser, so we need to use the optional thing here. And depending on if we are in the depending on if we are if we are on this platform server, we are using we are setting up the window mock object and putting information about language to it and URL to it. If we are on the browser, we are just giving to our user the default browser window object. And now, in our code, thanks to injecting this service, we can replace this console log, which is breaking the server-side rendering, with the wrapper one from the window wrapper service. Okay. To use it, if you didn't use the schematics with NG Toolkit, you need to install NG Toolkit /universal and just import the module in your application. Okay, so we spoke about determining the user language, and of course I'm going to use it now to show more examples and how we are using those entry points for server and browser. And there is a really great tool, really great library for internalization of your application, which is named ngx translate, and it gives you an ability to use a pipe translate inside your components, inside your templates, to ship different translations depending on what is the language set in your application. So for the browser, it's super simple. What you need to do to work with this application is to provide to it the translate loader. So you need to give it an information where to look for those JSON files where you have those key value pairs for translations. In the browser, we are just using HTTP and providing information where our translations can be retrieved for. So that's our factory. But the problem starts when we are on the server side, because it definitely doesn't make sense to make a HTTP call from the server abc.com to the same server abc.com. It would be much nice to get a loader which could retrieve these translation files from the file system, directly from the file system, because they are just residing next to our application build. So we are creating the universal loader, which is using the file system functionality from the Node.js. You can see it here. Because we are on Node.js, we are able to do that. We are reading the file with our translations. Depending on what language is passed to the loader, we are loading different file and just providing it as a translate loader interface. And finally, if we made those changes in the app browser and app server, we can use two different loaders depending on what environment we are, and use the use method on the translate service to load different language depending on what customer do we have. So Phototime now because all what we covered about the internationalization, you can find under this URL in this article. So, next thing, API calls performance. How many of you heard about the DRI abbreviation? DRI. Don't repeat yourself. Yeah, exactly. So I decided to add a small c here, and don't repeat your calls. What's the problem with server-side rendering with Angular and any other single-page applications? This is the flow of our user. He comes to our Node.js server. The server makes requests to external API or even our API. The response comes to the server. Server renders the HTML, sends it to the browser, so we are on the point 4. Then browser renders HTML and launches Angular again. So what Angular do, it's making the call again, the same call which we just made a couple seconds ago. What we would like to achieve is something like that. So we are launching again our server, Node.js is performing the call, and somehow we are passing information together with HTML and JavaScript. We are passing information about response of our call and letting the browser information just don't repeat it because it doesn't make sense. To do that, you can use the HttpCache module, which under the hood uses the transfer state client. What transfer state is, it's a again key value registry for passing information between Node.js and browser. So I can set key on the server side. Those registry goes to the browser. On the browser, I can take a look if the key is in the registry, and if it is there, I can retrieve the value. What the HttpCache module does under the hood, what is the implementation? It's using the HTTP interceptor. How many of you are familiar with interceptors? Okay, a lot. So I'm not going to tell, going deeply inside that. So quickly, interceptor is a way how you can manipulate the way of how HTTP client module works. A lot of time it is used to add, for example, the authentication header to the request and or course header, etc., etc., etc. So how the interceptor for HTTP cache looks like? So first of all, when we are on the server part, so we have server state interceptor, we are checking if given event in our request is of kind of HTTP response. So first of all, we are expecting that server side will perform mostly GET requests. So we are not checking if this is GET request. We assume it is GET, and if we got the response, we are setting new key in our transfer state registry. And then on the browser side, on the HTTP interceptor for the browser, we can check if we got the GET method, if GET method is performed. If it is a GET method, we are checking if we have the stored response inside. So if it's not GET, we are just handling it. If it's not GET, it's post, put, or anything different. So if it's not GET, we are going next to creating to retrieving the stored response from the registry. If it is there, we are setting it up as a response for our HTTP client module, and of course remove it from the registry because probably if the same request is performed again, it is looking for fresh data or something like that. So there is no reason to still keep the old value in the registry, and we are just handling the request. As a last step, we are providing those two interceptors, respectively in the app server module and app browser module. So this is about performance to don't repeat calls on the API. But what about calls which are not super performance? So what Universal does, whenever your server is performing some call and it's retrieving data, Universal always wait for this data to have something to be rendered there. So if you are working with some not efficient API which respond in 3 seconds, in fact your server-side build will take 3 seconds to be rendered. So what I propose you is to use the road resolver, or you can adjust the HTTP intercept or make the one on your end. It depends on your needs. But really often on my end, I am using resolvers for the data which are more than necessary for me. And depending on where I am, if I am on the browser, I want to wait for this data as long as I need to wait, because I don't care about. Okay, of course, I care when my component will load, but it's not affecting me from the SEO perspective. It's not affecting the load time of my website. If I am on the browser side, I am creating an observable which performs this. Inside of it, I am performing this GET request again, and I am wrapping it inside the observable only because I want to create another one, which will be the watchdog for the first one. The timer method gives me from the RxJS library, gives me an observable which will emit value after given amount of time in milliseconds. So the observable which is named watchdog will emit once after half second. So I'm going to use it to pipe my first observable to it to take until the watchdog. So whenever the watchdog emits before response from the API, I am just abandoning it and sending here. I am just abandoning it and sending information that I got a timeout and completing the observable. For those who more like diagrams, this is how it looks like in the battlefield. So request comes to my origin. This is request for my site. Angular request to the external API. If everything comes smoothly and I got a response before watchdog will emit, I am returning to my user the fully rendered HTML. But in the same situation, if request won't respond in this half second, watchdog emits the value. Then I am going to my user with the not fully rendered website. We are missing those values which didn't ship on time. But then the browser side, it's again performing this call and waiting for the response as long as it's needed. So again, quick view for an article for that. This is the link when you can see this implementation which you just saw. Okay, so smoothly. What's more? Because Angular Universal, and as you heard, we got Node.js in the backend, so of course it's not only server-side rendering. What we could do here, we can add some additional logic to our application. From the Angular, we are able to use functions and methods which are developed on the Node.js side. So, for example, functions which are manipulating file system or working with API keys, private keys, performing some authorization and so on. And we can use those inside the Angular. Here you can see the example of how in one of my blog posts I was using the method which is listening the files in the Node.js which are available for client to download. I am passing only the reference to this method to the Angular, and I am doing that because I want to use the transfer state to display this information on the client side. So I don't want to perform this additional HTTP call, which is not necessary. So you can do this with Angular and with Node.js. It's super simple. This is also the place where we are using this provide object, this provide parameter to the ngExpress engine. As I said on the beginning, we are providing additional things which are necessary for Angular just for this server side. So here I am providing information that the function list files is available under given token, and you can execute and pass some callback to it. So you are able to access sensitive data, in fact. Again, article reference. You can find it here. And finally, as I said, not only SSR and something about deployment. So you could ask me, if I am asking you to move your nice Angular application, which is static HTML and JavaScript, from the S3 or any other static hosting to not cheap dedicated server to pay for 24 hours of running something in the backend. And to be honest, not really, because you can go serverless. And serverless, I'm just going to quickly, it's a deep topic, so I'm going to quickly say about that. What is that? This is an event-driven environment. In simple words, you are getting your instance, you are getting your compute resource, you are getting your server, and you pay only for the uptime of this server. And whenever this server don't get a request from your customers, it's going to the sleep. For AWS, it's because there are a bunch of providers there. I am using AWS Lambda. For AWS, it's going to sleep after 15 minutes of inactivity. And the cold start. This is how we are naming the start of that. The moment of that when the first request is hitting the server. And we need the time to boot machine. The cold start take a little bit long because it could take up to 1 minute or even 2. But in fact, you can set up the cron method to don't let the serverless environment go sleep. But you still, what you are charged for are request and compute time used for render your view. So if you want to go serverless, oh, I forgot to attach link here. I will do that. So, no, oh no, I have a link, but I need to click again. Okay, so here you can find the article about deploying Angular Universal Application on AWS Lambda. So how to quickly achieve that. Okay, finally, an alternative for server-side rendering. If you don't want serverless, if you don't want EC2 or any other Node.js instance, you can go on with pre-render. The pre-render is a thing built on top of Universal. What we are doing here, we have a fully universal application, but on the build time when we are creating bundle for our client, we are running the Node.js of our local machine and just visiting each route with the JavaScript file, with a script, which is making a snapshot of the website. So it's just rendering it, putting to the HTML, saving this static HTML together with JavaScript, and this is the build which is ready to push to static hosting. One problem with it is that, let's say, our API is retrieving news from somewhere. So what you will ship to your customer, what will be SEO on your end, will be news from the day when you made the build. Because you don't have compute resources, you are not able to make those requests when your customer asks for render your application. So summarizing, let's compare all of those free methods which could be used for the final stage of the application. So ng-build, of course, from the SEO perspective, pre-render and server-side rendering is something what should be preferred. But as we said, regarding external calls, pre-render is not the best thing. If you retrieve a lot of data which need to be fresh, definitely you should go server-side. Finally, performance. In my opinion, on all of those, it's working super fast, and it's most fast for the pre-render, of course, because we are shipping the HTML instantly. We don't need we don't need the time to render it on the server side. So this is the speed demon for sure. But regarding the additional backend logic, retrieving some sensitive data from your server, or for example, using, let's say you are making an application which makes two-factor authorization, and you want to prompt the service which is sending push to mobile quicker when the request comes to your origin. So what you can do on your origin, based on some values which you retrieve from your user, let's say it would be a cookie, you can make the request to the authorization on the origin and give back some information like token, etc., in the transfer state to your user. So this is this is what I have on my mind by saying the sensitive data. So you can access the sensitive data and pass the results to the browser side, thanks to the server-side rendering, and only using the server-side rendering. Regarding difficulty of implementation, for sure, ngbuilds prod is just one more flag in the CLI, but I hope that after today, those marks at the end will start to be green, so you would be able to really easily make your application faster, CDN-friendly, and SEO-friendly. That's all from my side. If there are any questions, I'm more than happy to answer. Offline or now, doesn't matter.
Okay, I think I can start with my own question. So, how much time does it take to move regular crude website to server rendering, for instance, for you? Maybe have some experience.
To serverless?
Not serverless, server-side rendering.
For me, it took really a lot of time, because when I start to work with this, I was not able to find any ready solution out on the internet, and this is why ngToolkit has been founded. But right now, if your application is not really complex and you are not using a lot of not so obvious logic with window objects, documents, etc., if you don't have this collapse browser versus server, in most cases it's just using the schematics, it's just typing ng-add, ngToolkit universal, or the official one. And it's just like that. Okay, so 10 seconds and you are done.
Okay, potentially it can go from 10 seconds. That's very, very, very impressive, I could say. Okay, any more questions? Yep.
First of all, thanks for your talk. I got a question about interceptor, the case that you showed for us. When we call in an API from backend and don't call the same API from frontend, yeah, the response is cached and passed to frontend with server-side rendering. Yes?
Yes,
with
exactly.
So
exactly.
Some kind of object just passed to frontend, and we use it.
Yes, yes. This is what we call the transfer state.
Transfer state. Okay, so thank you.
You're welcome. I see one person there.
All right.
Thank you. This is a great part with transfer state, but what's about user state transfer? As I understand, when we get server-side rendered app on our front end, is this simple dead HTML code with CSS that loads then all JavaScript. And in this moment, our JavaScript app will fully replace our HTML code with all user interactions. For example, if we have some forms field, we will lost this data, or we have any instruments to fix that? Thank you.
If I understand you correctly, you are asking about situation like, for example, let's say we have a login page, and I clicked remember me, what gives me the that my login is already filled up and I need to only pass the password, yeah? Something like that?
For example, we have a server-side rendered page, and we fill a complex form. For example, with huge of fields, and we fill in our fields, and at this moment our server side or JavaScript or Angular regular app get loaded, fully loaded,
okay.
and it will replace all HTML on the page.
Okay, now I got you. What about this moment between displayed HTML and bootstrapped Angular or any other JavaScript? So, first of all, on modern browsers, JavaScript boots super fast. I think that user is not able to fill a load during 1 second. And second of all, as far as I know, I'm not sure on 100% about that. I would say that 90%. This is how sure I am on that. But as far as I know, Angular have a functionality of passing this information like form data which were put to that pure HTML to this view which is replaced with the JavaScript renderant one.
Cool. Any more questions? All right. I think at this point we can make a big round of applause to Maciej.
Thank you.
Thanks for a good talk. It was really inspiring for me.